All right, hello everybody. I am. This is a debate between me and Trey Rodriguez. Let's see here. I'm gonna try to add him so that we can do this. All right, I just sent him an invitation. So this is a debate about Isaiah 53. Um, the two sides are uh, the argument is about what the suffering servant refers to in Isaiah 53. So Isaiah 53 talks about a suffering servant who suffered, and was vindicated, and a bunch of stuff. And Christians interpret this. Okay, there's Trey. All right, how's it going?
You all.
Can you understand me?
I hear you. Yeah, you hear me?
Okay, great. So the
Good.
earbuds are working. Great. All
It's a
right.
it's a well, it's a miracle of the God you don't believe in. Um,
Yeah.
hold on.
All right.
Uh, Here we go. I'm actually gonna sit down for this one.
Okay.
Um, which I don't know if you ever saw the anime Death Note, but in the character
Yeah,
there's
I
a
love
there's
that.
a
I love that anime.
L has to sit a certain way, or
Hmm.
his ability to think drops. With me, I have to stand up and walk around, and my ability to think drops.
Oh yeah.
And so
Okay.
I always tell people, if you want me to lose a debate, make me sit down. But I really don't have a where I can stand. So you very well may have lucked out. But either way,
Wow.
I'm
All
ready
right
when you
then.
are.
All right. Well,
Oh, wait.
I will start, I guess. Starting the
Are,
timer.
are, are
Are
you
you ready?
keeping track?
What's that?
You're doing the time?
Say that one more time.
You're doing the timer?
Yeah, I have a timer here. Yep.
Oh, I trust you.
All right. Starting the time in three, two, one.
Good
Time
luck.
started. All right. So, my position is that Isaiah 53 refers to Israel. The suffering servant in Isaiah 53 is a personification of Israel. Not all of Israel, not the whole nation, but the righteous remnant, meaning that the righteous remnant is the one who suffers because of the sins of the rest of Israel and because of the sins of the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Persians, etc. Everyone who afflicted Israel. All right. So my evidence for this, this is what scholars call the collective interpretation of Isaiah 53. My evidence is all of the verses preceding Isaiah 53 that refer to Israel as God's servant. This includes Isaiah 41:8, Isaiah 42:1. Actually, I'll just show you right here. All right. So right here, Isaiah 41:8, right there. It says, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen." Isaiah 44:21, right here. It says, "Remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I formed you. You are my servant, O Israel. I will not be forgotten. Uh, you will not be forgotten by me." So there's a few of these out there. You know, there's a bunch of these that refer to Israel specifically as God's servant. All right. Also, I would also like to refer to the oh, the New English Bible, Oxford Study Edition, which sides with the collective interpretation. Okay, here. we have the interpretation right here, footnoted, and I'll just read it out loud. All right, it says, this is page 788. It says, fourth servant song, the suffering servant. See 42 verses 1 through 4. Israel, the servant of God, has suffered as a humiliated individual. However, the servant endured without complaint because it was vicarious suffering, suffering for others, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm running low on time, so I won't read the whole thing, but basically that's what it says. I can paste it in the comments. All right, so there are also a couple reasons why it can't be Jesus, all right? One reason is that the passage makes more sense interpreted as Israel, not as Jesus. One reason is because the passage switches tenses in the middle. It switches tenses in verses 10 through 12, okay? So the first part of the verse, here, let me find it real quick. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. So it's past tense for a while. And then on verse 10, it says, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. So it switches tenses. It goes to future tense. He shall in the future. All right? Okay. Also, the offspring thing is interesting. Jesus did not have any children, so it can't be referring to Jesus. And also, it uses Christians will claim that it's just talking about the church or future Christians or something, but it's not, because it uses the word zera, which refers to biological offspring. All right, ben is the word for metaphorical offspring. All right, so Jesus didn't have offspring, therefore it can't be referring to Jesus. All right, 30 seconds left. One more thing is, actually, I'll just, time. All right, that's it for me. Go ahead, Trey.
All right, start now. All right. The passage of the suffering servant, mainly Isaiah 52 and 1, there are other ones in there, of course, but, comes in late when the passage that many people actually quote. It's clearly in reference to Jesus. It is so clear, I truly cannot imagine any other explanation, including the one that my opponent has offered here today. The first thing I would like to make clear is that the prophecy is messianic. Admittedly, I am not sure what my opponent intends to argue, but I feel confident in saying this, as it is supported by many ancient Jewish literature. Among the first of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls there was a foundational piece called the Community Rule. The Community Rule was exactly what it sounds like. It was a rule dictating a code of conduct for the Jews that had settled in the area. It quotes Isaiah 43 to support its messianic mission, quote, to open a path for the Lord. Clearly, the quotation of Isaiah in these scrolls shows the Jews of the area could be talking about the Messiah. Michael Linnell, who has a PhD and is a professor of Jewish studies, notes one of the earliest Jewish dogma is quoted as saying, Isaiah 53, my servant, the Messiah, end quote. This Targum, written by Jonathan ben Uziel of the 1st century, again, clearly draws a connection between the Messiah and the passage of Isaiah 53. Even more, he points out how Talmud Sanhedrin 98, it asks the question, what is the Messiah's name? And it says, quote, the sick one, for he shall bear our sicknesses, quoting Isaiah. Now, I feel like I've given a pretty good reason to believe the prophecy was believed by early Jews to be messianic. And once we establish that, it's all downhill from there for anyone who feels as though this is about Israel. One of the most blatant problems with this is that Israel simply doesn't work. It strikes out multiple times in category of what it takes to be the servant. The servant's soul has to be made an offering for the transgressors. It didn't complain about the suffering he endured. I'll take this time simply to interrupt what I've written down and say that Stephen says that Israel didn't complain about suffering, we must be talking about two different Israels. It was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people, and had no violence. Does this even sound like Israel? We can't go one day without an atheist telling me how violent Israel was. Israel was violent, complained about suffering, was not cut off from the land of the living. And it says in Isaiah 53:8, quote, for my people, no matter who is talking here, whether it be God or Isaiah, my people clearly refers to Israel. Due to the clear and present fact that this servant is supposed to be, quote, bearing the sins of many and making intercession for the transgressors, as mentioned, Israel is named as the transgressors. For, quote, my people are the ones who have transgressed. In closing, I will attack one thing that is blatantly obvious to building this up. To quote Dr. Dale Bach, who holds a PhD in New Testament studies, and puts it so simply, Israel does not fit. Many people ask, well, why don't the Jews believe Jesus is the Messiah? This is sort of a trick question. Well, there are Messianic Jews, Jews of did begin to accept Jesus. Paul, formerly known as Saul, was indeed convinced Jesus was the Messiah. Paul was such a smart and knowing man of scriptures, there is non-biblical references for this, and when he believed that Jesus was the Messiah, Festus, the procrastinator of the Judea at the time, his only explanation was, you're so smart, you've gone insane. I must say it is a theme, smart people sounding crazy, to not so smart people. So a quick recap. The passage is messianic. We have three early pieces of Jewish literature to support this. Israel does not fit the bill, like at all. It doesn't even make sense for the suffering servant to be Israel. And we see that even the most intelligent Jews at Jesus' time saw this. And it continues today. Remember Michael Linnell, who I brought up and quoted? He was raised Jewish and now acknowledges Jesus as the suffering servant. I don't want to overwhelm my opponent here. I don't know how much time I have left. Stephen, how much time do I have left?
Actually, that's time right there. Yep. All right. So I think my opponent is not really understanding my argument. My argument is not that Israel, the entire nation, is the suffering servant. My argument is that the righteous remnant of Israel is the suffering servant. That means it's only the Jews who have been faithful to God, according to the Torah, and followed the Tanakh. Well, sorry, according to the Tanakh, and followed the Torah, and have not strayed. Because many of the Jews, and the Bible makes this very clear, many of the Jews strayed away and were not faithful and practiced idolatry. So that takes care of the whole thing about violence and deceit, because the righteous remnant would be the Jews who would not have committed violence or deceit, and deceit being idolatry. All right, so my opponent name dropped a few people, and I would like to also name drop a few people. All right, so the New English Bible with the Apocrypha Oxford Study Edition, these are the people who edited it, who were responsible for editing it. All right, directed by representatives of the Baptist Union of Great Britain and Ireland, the Church of England, the Church of Scotland, the Council of Churches for Wales, the Irish Council of Churches, the London Yearly Meeting of the Society of Friends, the Methodist Church of Great Britain, the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales, the Roman Catholic Church in Ireland, the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland, the United Reformed Church, the British and Foreign Bible Society, the National Bible Society of Scotland. So I think that takes care of the name drop portion. Anyway, all right, so he mentioned that some Jews interpreted the passage in Isaiah 53 as being messianic. For example, the Targum, and he gave a couple other examples. Well, that's an argument, but just because some Jews interpreted it that way doesn't mean that that's the way it should be interpreted. The way it should be interpreted is the way that Isaiah himself interpreted it. And I just gave a few scripture references. For example, Isaiah 41:8, but you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend. Isaiah 42:1, behold, my servant, who I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. Isaiah 43:10. Oh wait, sorry. Isaiah 44:1-2. But now hear, O Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I have chosen. So Isaiah himself tells us who the servant is. The servant is Israel. He tells us that like 6 times. All right. And the fact that some Jews interpret it the wrong way doesn't really change that. I mean, Jews can interpret scriptures in many different ways. And the Targum actually interprets Isaiah 53 very strangely. It has a lot of very strange interpretations of Isaiah 53 that even Christians won't agree with, you know? Just read it for yourself, all right? So I would also like to reiterate, and of course, I'm sure my opponent had a prepared opening, and so wouldn't have gotten a chance to respond to the challenge that I made. But the fact that Isaiah 53 says the servant will see his offspring and uses the word zerah, meaning biological, literal offspring, doesn't use ben. Ben would be metaphorical offspring. That, I think, is a very big problem with the interpretation of Isaiah 53 being Jesus, all right, since Jesus didn't have offspring, according to almost all Christians. I mean, I did talk to like one Christian who claimed that Jesus might have had offspring, but, you know, that's, I doubt my opponent is going to make that claim. Also, let's see here. It also says that the servant was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. All right. So Jesus, according to the Bible, had lots of friends, was very famous, was very popular, and only experienced suffering at the end of his life. You wouldn't describe someone who was famous and popular and happy, but had a bad death as a man of sorrows. That would be someone who experienced hardship throughout his whole life, okay? And that, I think, describes Israel perfectly, because Israel has been in captivity, enslaved, you know, tormented, all that stuff. So that's about the end of my time. So that's it. Go ahead, Trey.
Okay, I'd like to bring some things up that my opponent says. My opponent mainly says that only the Jews that were good are they're the personification of Israel. Does this mean that they meet the requirements? Were the Jews that were good in Israel cut off from the land of the living? God took them all to heaven for a special appointment. Does this mean that they simply were not violent? It's possible that somebody who fought a war for God, but then, you know, stayed true to him, would also still count as this personification, right? But they would still be violent. Also, and how foolish of me to let my place drop here, but the soul is made an offering for the transgressors. Were there a bunch of Jesus Christ in Israel who God struck down to save them? Also, stricken for transgression of my people. Yes, I'm going to simply continue on with what I had prepared, and which goes on to say, Dr. Michael Brown, who holds a PhD in Near Eastern languages and literature, points out how in Isaiah we see a pattern of Israel being called the servant, but then it goes on to name individuals. For example, Isaiah 22:20, my servant Elikim. Isaiah 41:8, my servant Jacob. Now, I actually ran into Stephen yesterday, a little bit before this debate, and he said that Jacob is Israel. He's the personification. But this simply cannot be because he said it's poetic, and I thought to myself, oh boy, here we go again. But in book of Isaiah, chapter 44, verse 1, it says, now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel. It is clearly differentiating from Jacob and Israel there. If I was to say, good old Uncle Sam got into a war with Vietnam, you'd think, oh, Uncle Sam, America. But if I was to say, good old Uncle Sam and America got into a war with Vietnam, you think, why would you say it like that? It just simply wouldn't make sense. Also, he says I name drop. I did not name drop. Name drop is why I simply make the argument from authority. But Oxford says this, but this church says this. I didn't name drop. I gave people the support, the evidence I presented. I don't know, Stephen, do you know why Oxford thinks this or why the church thinks this or why? I wouldn't exactly get my religious literature from Europe of all places. They're not really that great. But do you, and also he says Isaiah interpreted it for us. Isaiah didn't interpret. Prophets are not allowed to interpret. They simply are called prophets because they speak on behalf of God. If he was to try to put his own spin on what God has said, he'd be a terrible prophet. You can't, put your own bias on what God says because maybe you're wrong. Does Stephen have Isaiah's commentary? Isaiah wrote a commentary on this? Stephen, I have to see this. Please send it to me. Also, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but he says Jesus didn't suffer. Jesus was not a man of suffering and sorrows. This guy from before he was even born was born next to a cow and a pig. He had to constantly move around because the religious teachers of his days were threatening to kill him. His parents thought he was demon possessed at first. This is a man who never really was at peace. He simply he had some friends and some good backup. So did Israel. Israel had some good moments in their life. I'm seeing a little bit of an inconsistency between Israel and Jesus here. Just because Jesus had a happy moment or something in his life, so did Israel. And again, he says that, so what? Some Jews misinterpreted this. No Jews, as far as I'm concerned, in the early scriptures say it's Israel. As a matter of fact, in Asmos, Paul records a conversation of someone saying, no, the suffering servant is actually Isaiah. The only problem is, well, I would like a very early source in which somebody says Israel is the person that's suffering. And I'd like to hear the reasoning behind that. Stephen, how much more time do I have left?
About 30 seconds.
Okay, so guys, I'll take this time to point out that among the Jews, they've never really understood this because for some Jews, the Messiah was that he's going to come, he's going to be this big, strong military man. But then here we get this prophecy, he's suffering, and through suffering, he redeems people. And the Jews were like, what is this? And they eventually came to this conclusion, this theory, that, well, there's two messiahs. However, Christians, we know the truth. There's not two messiahs, there's two comings. And I'll concede.
All right. You conceded your 1 second.
How generous of me.
Yeah. All right. Starting time now. Okay, so my opponent has not yet responded to my two arguments for why it couldn't be Jesus. One, that Jesus did not have offspring, and two, that actually he responded to the second one. He said that Jesus was a man of suffering, that he had to constantly move around. Wow, that's terrible. Having to constantly move around. And he was never at peace? Really? You're a Christian who believes that Jesus wasn't at peace? I can think of several billion Christians who would agree with you. I mean, what makes you think that Jesus wasn't at peace? I mean, he's divine, Okay, so anyway, I don't think that the okay. Oh yeah, and you said that he was born in a manger. Do you remember anything that happened to you while you were a baby? Because I don't. Do you think that Jesus remembered being born in a manger? Do you think that he would have been distressed about that at all? I think that would be something that would have stressed out his parents, but I don't think that would have stressed out Jesus himself as a baby. Anyway, moving on. So you said that he was never, or you said that Israel was never cut off from the land of the living. Okay, that's a good argument. Let me respond to that. Cut off from the land of the living does not refer to death, actually. It might sound like it's referring to death, but actually, the entire chapter of Ezekiel 37, look at Ezekiel 37, it frequently refers to being cut off from the land of the living. It uses that phrase to refer to Israel's captivity. Okay, so the captivity period where the Israelites were sent to Babylon and Assyria, that's referred to as being cut off from the land of the living in Ezekiel 37. Okay, it's used multiple times. Look it up. All right, and differentiating Jacob from Israel, that can easily be explained as differentiating from the entire nation of Israel versus differentiating from the righteous remnant, which is what my argument is. All right. Let's see here. There are other places where Israel is referred to with the singular pronouns he, his, and him. These include Deuteronomy 32:10 through 13, Hosea 8:3, Hosea 14:5 through 6, Jeremiah 50:19. Just look those up. Anybody watching? And let's see here. Okay. In Isaiah 42:19 through 20, God says that his servant is blind and deaf. All right. So I still don't think that my opponent has responded to the fact that multiple times in like Isaiah 41, 44, 50, what was it? No, sorry, not 50, 49, it calls Israel God's servant. All right. I'm not sure if he's responded to that, but let me just read one more. All right, Isaiah 49:3. And he said to me, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified." Isaiah 48:20. Go out from Babylon, flee from Chaldea. Declare this with a shout of joy. Proclaim it, send it out to the end of the earth. Say, the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. So, let me see here. What else? And my opponent also has not responded to the fact that the tense changes in the middle in verse 10. The tense changes from past tense to future tense, and he's not responded to the whole thing about Ben versus Zerah. The word Ben is used metaphorically in Genesis 6:2 through 4. Genesis 6:2 through 4, Deuteronomy 14:1. Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Psalm 82:6, Isaiah 45:11, Genesis 15:2. So yeah, those are some examples of the word Ben being used metaphorically. The word Zerah is always used to refer to biological offspring. And that's my time. All right, go ahead, Trey.
Now I'm going to cut to the chase mainly because I don't like wasting time. I'm not going to respond to the word that means biological offspring. I don't know. I'll take a rain check on that and get back to somebody later. I'll look it up. We can conversate some other time. But for the sake of this debate, I simply am not going to respond to it. I don't know. Also, he said, so Jesus had to move around. Oh, big deal. Jesus didn't have to just move around. Jesus had to move around because people were going to kill him. For why you have to move around versus you have to move around because someone's constantly trying to kill you because of what you're saying. And, that's clearly different. And he says, well, do you think Jesus remembered being born in a manger? So what? You think being born in by barn animals is exactly comfortable? If I get punched while I'm boxing and someone knocks me out and I don't remember that they punched me, does that mean I didn't suffer? No, I still suffered. And then, of course, when it comes to Jesus, let's look at how he died. Hi, person in the comment section. And then, at the end of the day, regardless of what he has to say about Jesus, Israel is a much worse interpretation here. Jesus, you want to keep track of how many times Jesus strikes out. Look at Israel. For example, he says, well, when I say Israel, I'm referring to the righteous ones. And he says, okay, well, if the righteous ones are the servant, then they would have to be cut off from the land of the living. What does that mean? And it says they're given a grave among the rich. They're given a grave. This is all still metaphorical, apparently. And he said, also, Jesus was the one of peace, not necessarily the um, Israelites. And at this point in time, I'm sort of running out of things here to say. At the end of the day, this goes to show we have that this is messianic. My opponent still hasn't responded to what I brought up. This is supposed to be about the Messiah. We have, the earliest Greek writers talking about this. In Amos, like I said, Paul gets into a conversation with somebody and like, no, it's actually Isaiah. My opponent would be much better off talking about Isaiah here. He would actually fit much better here. Also, let me dig up some more of my stuff. Didn't complain about the suffering they endured. So no righteous people in Israel complained about the suffering. And, it's like being that kid in class who's always perfectly well behaved, but then that one clown has to show off. All right, no recess. Yeah, thanks a lot. Also, stricken for the transgression of my people. I mean, I simply don't know what else to say here. And he's talking about, well, in the Bible, many people are called the servant. Many people are called the servant. Okay, but we're not talking about, just many people being called the servant. Like I brought it up, it calls Eklehem earlier in the book of Isaac, God's servant. And I understand. Also, I couldn't quite hear you. That word you said that was metaphorically used in Genesis, I don't know.
Ben.
I didn't hear what that word was. Don't bother answering now. But essentially, this is what I have to say on the matter. Say what you want about Jesus, but if you're going to say Jesus doesn't fit because of this reason, I can strike Israel out 100 times over again. And at this point in time, I'm going to concede. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. All right, then I'll start. Okay. Let me check my notes real quick. Okay, so my opponent mentions that Jesus suffered because he had to move around constantly because people were trying to kill him. How'd that work out for them? Remember that time where they tried to drop him off a cliff and he passed right through them? I don't think Jesus was concerned about that. I don't think that he suffered knowing that they were trying to kill him when he can just pass right through them. Like, I don't know how he did that, like phasing through or something. I don't know. But anyway, I don't think that Jesus suffered during his life. The only time he suffered would have been at his death, according to the Bible. According to the Bible, all right? According to the Bible, he had a good family. He had parents who cared about him. He had siblings who cared about him. He had great friends who were very loyal to him. And he was very popular. He was immensely popular. Crowds flocked to hear his preaching by the thousands, apparently. So I don't think that there's any, I mean, do you think that Joseph abused him as a child? Do you think that he got beat up at school or something? I mean, there's no evidence of that, in the Bible. I don't think that there's any good reason to call Jesus a man of suffering, acquainted with grief. There's just no evidence of that. What grief was he acquainted with? Saying that he had to move around a bit because people were trying to kill him, but he knew they wouldn't succeed. That's not a really strong argument, And you've conceded the Zerah thing. Okay, great. So that's a point for me, I guess. Given a grave among the rich. Okay, Israel was taken into captivity where they were enslaved by the rich Babylonians and Assyrians, and some of them died in captivity, and so there you go. I mean, it's not that hard, Okay, so you claimed that this passage is messianic. There's no evidence it's messianic. There's no indication in the passage itself that it's messianic. Yes, some Jews back then uh, considered it messianic. I agree with that. However, many Jews did not consider it messianic. Um, in fact, in 248 AD, Origen, the Christian, in his book Contra Celsum, chapter 1, or sorry, book 1, chapter 55, talks about how he debated about Isaiah 53 with Jews who believed the suffering servant referred to the nation of Israel. And I'll read the quote real quick. Now I remember that on one occasion at a disputation held with certain Jews who were reckoned wise men, I quoted these prophecies, to which my Jewish opponent replied that these predictions bore reference to the whole people regarded as one individual, and as being in a state of dispersion and suffering, in order that many proselytes might be gained on account of the dispersion of the Jews among numerous heathen nations. All right, so according to Origen himself, the church father, many Jews back then, back in the 3rd century, believed that the Isaiah 53 referred to the whole nation of Israel. So different Jews had different interpretations, and I don't think you've responded to the fact that Isaiah himself says that the servant is Israel, which he says on numerous occasions, including Isaiah 49:3, and he said to me, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified." I mean, there's like 6 or 7 of those verses that I can read to you. All right, and I have like 30 seconds left, but I'll just concede the remainder of my time. Go ahead, Trey.
Well, like I said, I'm running out of things to say here. I see someone wants to join. I don't know if they're still here, but Stephen, maybe you'd let them join.
Sure.
That'd be fine. Ultimately, I was going to say, Jesus didn't suffer. Let me tell you one thing that Jesus definitely suffered. Jesus suffering, if he is who he said he is, he suffered knowing what he was sent here to do. If I was to tell you as a child, you are going to suffer one of the most horrific deaths ever known to history in front of everybody, and you're going to be naked in front of your friends and your mother and all that, and and you just knew that up until the point was coming. When we look at the Bible and we see Jesus, do we see a happy-go-lucky man? Many people have actually pointed out to me, and I hate to admit it, Jesus sounds rather unhappy in the Bible. He sounds like someone who is, he's not exactly a very happy, wonderful, run-around-and-play person. Also, Stephen says he had friends. Yeah, he had friends that eventually denied knowing him, and I don't know what they scattered, and they didn't. I don't think even they knew quite what was going on at the moment. But at the end of the day, to say that Jesus Christ was not a man of suffering, you you have to read the Bible and you have to wonder, did the guy have a crack of smile? People are constantly trying to kill him. People are accusing him of blasphemy. He even goes on to say this in the Bible. Even the birds, he says something like, even the birds have their nests, but there is no rest for the Son of Man. He says this is just exhausting, and he's not happy, and he's miserable. Okay, this person still wants on. I'll let you go one more time, Stephen. I'll let you make the call on what we do. Ultimately, he says, well, people who died when Israel was captured, they were given a grave among the rich. Okay, but then by default, wouldn't that mean also the unjust war? I don't know if my opponent thinks that Babylonian gave a grave site for the righteous and then gave a grave site to the horrible, awful ones. This much more fits the historical count and the scholarly consensus supported opinion that Jesus was buried in a tomb. And at the exact moment that I'd like to simply say, Stephen's entire thing is, well, it says that Israel is a servant. Yes, it refers to Israel as a servant, mainly because Israel's been there the longest. Israel was the OG servant of God, and then we go on and we go on to say that, then new people come and they're the servant. And when we look at the songs of the suffering servant, what we're seeing is almost a rewrap of history. God's almost telling the history of Israel and all that. He brings up Jacob, and then he brings up, eventually works its way up to Isaac. He talks about all his servants. Yes, Israel was a servant of God, but was it the suffering servant? No, I think I've shown that all the early Jews, at least that we have seen in the interpretation of the early rabbinic literature, tend to say, no, it's messianic. And then, we got people, well, no, it's Israel. The sources I have are much older, and I think that in history, we rely on the earliest sources. That's it. I'm done. I don't know what else to say. I'll concede. Stephen, go on.
Do you want to have like a free talking for the last like 20 minutes or something? We can just do free talking.
Sure.
Okay.
This guy wants to join. Can he get on?
What's that?
Well, I want you to take your 5 minutes. I was wondering
Okay.
if James.
All right, I'll take my 5 minutes. All right, but that'll give me that will give me 5 turns, and you've only had 4. Is that okay with you?
Who cares? Yeah, I made my point.
Okay. All right. So time starting now. Okay. So my opponent said that Jesus suffered by knowing about his death. I don't find that to be the strongest argument. I would say a man of suffering would be someone who actually suffered like throughout his life. Like bad things happened to him throughout his life, not just that he knew something bad would happen to him eventually. And he said that he suffered, that Jesus suffered like the worst death or whatever. This would be true if Jesus' crucifixion was like most crucifixions, in that it lasted for days, but Jesus' crucifixion lasted for 6 hours. And I'm not saying that's not bad. Yeah, 6 hours of immense pain would really suck, but he definitely didn't suffer as much as most crucified victims. Okay, most of them were up there for like 5 days, something like that. It took a long time to die for crucified victims. Anyway, so he said that Jesus didn't really have great friends because his friends denied knowing him. Of course, referring to Peter denying Jesus 3 times that one time. That's one friend denying Jesus and then regretting it immensely afterwards. I don't think that counts as a bad friend. I mean, yeah, denying him kind of sucks, but he regretted it afterwards. He was a true friend. He was very loyal. In fact, Thomas the Apostle, even though it took a while for him to be convinced that Jesus rose from the dead, there was one time, I can't remember which book, but he said, "Let us also go with him, that we may die with him," or something like that. I don't remember, but his friends were willing to die with him. Those are great friends. I don't have any friends who are willing to die with me. But anyway, and he said that people accused him of blasphemy. So that's something that makes him a man of suffering. Okay, being accused of blasphemy. People have accused me of lots of things. Especially Christians, accuse me of being a puppet of the devil and things like that. Does that make me a man of suffering also? So I don't have half as good friends as Jesus had, and I've been accused of just as bad things as Jesus has been accused of. So am I a man of suffering? I mean, anyway. And he said also the unjust were buried with the rich. Also the unjust Jews were also buried with the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Okay, so what? It says he will be buried with the wicked. Okay, it doesn't say that. It doesn't exclude the unjust. It says yes, the righteous remnant will be buried with the Babylonians. It doesn't exclude others, other unrighteous people being buried with the wicked. So anyway, that's all I have to respond to. All right, I'll just concede the rest of my time, and we can just do the free conversation kind of thing. All right. So, do you have any responses, Trey? Real quick.
I will mention you brought up Jesus said he had friends that were willing to die with him.
Mm.
Yeah, people can say things. People can say things, but actually doing two different things. When Jesus was getting arrested by the Romans, where were his friends that were going to die with him? Like that, gone. Thanos snapped. Not nowhere to be found. And they got Peter who straight up denies him. Also, when I call you a man of suffering, Stephen, you have to put up with me. Of course, you're a man of suffering. And and this isn't something. It's not just that he was accused of blasphemy. This is a person who, went up to the high priest and insulted them pretty harshly for their time. Also, you say Jesus had friends. Like I said, Jesus himself says there is no place for me to lay my head. Even the birds have the nest, but there's no rest for me. When you look at Jesus, he's not really getting along with his followers. The best he's doing is answering questions. And then somebody, one popular example, somebody says, "Hey, can we rain fire and brimstone?" And how does Jesus reply to his great and wonderful friends? "Get behind me, Satan!"
That's not the
Again,
time. That's not the time where he said that. He said,
are you sure? In the
yeah,
Gospel of Mark,
he said, "Get behind me, Satan," to Peter when Peter said, "This shall never happen to you," when Jesus referred to his death.
I could be wrong. But either
Yeah.
way, yes, the point is, does Jesus really strike you as a happy guy?
Yeah, he strikes me as a very happy, at peace, um, fulfilled kind of guy who has accepted his future suffering and isn't really dwelling on it. He's helping people. He's extremely popular. He has great friends who Christians always claim did die for Jesus. So you saying that saying it and doing it are two different things, but Christians claim that they did die for Jesus, don't they? Don't you claim that? Don't you
He
claim that the
died after he was already dead,
okay,
after he already suffered.
okay, so they still did it.
Yeah, and then, I'd be pretty tempted if I thought someone was really gone and they came back to life and were like, "Oh, I was wrong. So sorry about leaving you. Please forgive me for that one time." But
So are you
ultimately,
claim? Sorry, go ahead.
when you look at Jesus' life, I'm a Christian. I can tell you right now, like I said, I have to wonder if the guy ever even cracked a smile
Really?
because he's being yelled at. You don't know what you're talking about. Your parents think you're demon possessed. Hey, can we do this thing? No. And now let's play 20 questions. You all answer me a bunch of questions. That's all he does. He seems like a man, almost like a man who constantly worked and never actually got any joy out of life. And you know the old saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Well, quick correction. His family didn't think that he was demon possessed. They thought he was crazy. But I mean, it's a small point. But anyway, I don't think that that's. I think that that's evidence that his family was concerned about him. Because if anybody did what Jesus did, their family would think that they were crazy. If I, you know, left my home and started like street preaching, a deviant version of my religion, my family would think that I was crazy too, and they would do the exact same thing. And I have a great family who cares about me. So I don't think that that's a point that Jesus had a miserable life or something. And you saying that Jesus never cracked a smile? What? I mean, that's I. Let me ask you something, Trey. Do you really think that Jesus didn't have good friends? That none of Jesus' friends who spent 3 years with him cared about him?
Oh no, I believe they cared about him, but that's because the historical consensus is that when they were following him around, they thought he was the Messiah and that he was this great war military general they all talked about. When the Romans come to arrest Jesus, the guy takes out his sword, slices his ear off. He thinks he's delivering this great and mighty blow of this great revolution. But then he's like, "Nope, nope, stop. Here, take me." And then they're gone. I don't know what good friends abandon you after 3 years. Also, I'd like to bring up, what happened before this. Jesus, one of the points that highlights how miserable Jesus was is when his followers go around and he falls asleep and they fall asleep on him. He prays, if there's any other way this can happen, let it happen some other way. But nonetheless, God's will be done, not mine. Then he goes and he finds out his friends who are supposed to be praying for him fell asleep. And he says, hey, again, wake up. Comes back and he's like, hey, God, it's me again. You know, again, I'm not saying no, but again, if there's any way this can happen. And then it says that God sent an angel down to strengthen him. Jesus was, I don't know how else to put it. Jesus does not strike me as a very happy person. I'd be
Okay.
miserable.
I mean, I think that if I did like a census or survey of Christians, and asked them, do you think that Jesus was happy during his ministry? I think most of them would say yes, but I guess you fall into the category of Christians who say no. But all right, whatever. We'll let the audience, decide for themselves whether, which argument is more convincing. You and me are just going to have to agree to disagree. I think that the Bible portrays Jesus as perfectly happy and at peace and chill, like whenever the Pharisees criticize him, he's always giving them like the best answers and kicking their asses, like he doesn't seem to be flustered by any of the criticism or accusations. They're all accusing him of different things and he's just smacking them down. But okay, you and I will just have to agree to disagree. I think that the Gospels portray Jesus as a very happy and at peace person. All right, so
Can I make one more point?
yep.
You brought up how they said they would die for him in the Bible.
Mhm.
He says, hey, we'll die for you. We'll never leave you. How does he respond? Isn't that the part where he gives them the prophecy? You know, before the rooster crows, one of you's going to betray me and the other you will deny me. So
Um,
even as
hang on a sec. Let me check real quick.
his friends are sitting here trying to comfort him, saying, no, we won't leave you. He's like, no, you will.
There's one instance where that happens, but there's another instance where I don't think it happens.
Well, did it not happen, or did the gospel writer just not mention it?
Okay. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. And Jesus doesn't respond to that. That's John chapter 11, verses 12 through 16. Jesus doesn't respond.
And again, even if that is what they said, the consensus among scholars is that they went with him when they said let's go die with him. They weren't saying okay, let's just lay our head on the chopping block and die with him. They're under the impression he's going to start a war, and we're going to be the soldiers for the Messiah, and we're going to go die in battle. It's going to be great for him. That's probably a much more realistic picture they had in their mind.
So your argument is basically just that Jesus' disciples weren't very good friends. Even though they spent 3 years with him, they weren't very good friends. They didn't really care that much about him. All right, whatever. That's your argument,
After they left him as soon as he needed them the most.
Okay. Okay. Go with that then. We'll let our viewers decide which argument sounds more convincing. All right, so I think I've defeated all of your arguments that Israel is not as good of a match as Jesus. I think I've knocked them all down, but you haven't knocked down all of mine. You haven't knocked down the one about Jesus having no offspring. And the one about the tense changing in the middle. Why did the tense change? How come it went from past tense to future tense in verse 10?
Well, Stephen, in response, I think that's very hard to hit a moving target. You are taking, you know, I call this essentially the Stephen approach. Everything that could have potentially debunked you is poetic and not really meant to be taken that way. I'm going with a literal interpretation. Jesus literally fits this much more. But when
Except
it
for the
says
offspring
Israel,
thing. In that case,
oh,
Christians take the metaphorical approach because they
with
claim that
that,
the offspring refers to metaphorical offspring.
well, we can't let you have all the fun. In all honesty, though, for example, I have it saying that this suffering servant will be given up as an offering for my people's transgressions. Now, you can slice that and say, well, when it says my people, it's speaking about Israel, the nation. But, it's talking about the people who are going to die and be stricken are the good Israelites. And essentially, Stephen, I have no way to debunk that. I just don't believe it because I'm going with a much more literal interpretation. It's amazing to me that atheists are always like, you Christians are stretching, oh, it's all poetic. But essentially, I find atheists using it more.
Yeah. Actually, I forgot to respond to that thing about my people referring to Israel. My people refers to the pagan nations, um, the Gentile nations that hang on. Is it okay? Um, Isaiah 52:15 says, "The kings of the world will be shocked by the servant." And the first verse of chapter 53 expresses shock by the servant. Therefore, the speaker of chapter 53 represents the kings of the world. So, my people refers to like the Babylonians and the Assyrians. It doesn't refer to the Jews.
So God's calling the people who have been completely destroying Judah his people?
No, what? No, this is the speaker represents the kings of the world. Therefore, the speaker who would be the kings of the world, the speaker's people would be the people of the kings of Babylon and Assyria.
Okay, well, it doesn't seem like they were shutting their mouths at the good Israelites. I mean, I don't know if you know the history of the Judea and the people you just mentioned, but they attacked Judah and they destroyed 40 of their cities. They're not shutting their mouth at them. The voice is saying, "Oh, we're amazed at you." But Judah, do you think Judah was amazed by these people?
Wait, it says, "My people will be amazed." That would be not Judah, that would be the Babylonians and the Assyrians. It's saying in the future they'll be amazed because the people of Israel will be exalted. It's predicting that in the future they'll be exalted. And that's what will cause amazement, all right? But when you
Oh,
said, what was it? Oh, that the people of Israel didn't shut their mouths. I'm talking about the righteous remnant again, all right? So I don't know how you can claim that all of the righteous people in Israel didn't, they didn't shut their mouths or something. And also, Jesus didn't shut his mouth because Jesus had that whole theological debate with Pontius Pilate. He said several things while he was hanging on the cross. Jesus was not silent the entire time he was going through all that. So, you know, it doesn't
no,
really fit Jesus.
if your interpretation is legit, the ones who are supposed to be amazed and shut their mouths at the suffering servant are, like you said, the Assyrians, or I forgot how to pronounce it, but the people, but
Assyrians,
Babylonians,
Babylonians, yeah.
and they're supposed to be the ones that look at the suffering servant. The in your eyes that would be the righteous. They're supposed to look at the righteous in Israel and be like, oh, that's so amazing. But however, if you take this approach, now it's a failed prophecy because before Israel was ever risen up and truly made amazing, Babylonians are, I'm pretty sure, are gone now, conquered by Greece, right? So this would have to be a
Um,
failed.
by Persia, and then Persia was later conquered by Greece. Um,
So,
what's that?
so, so either we accept your interpretation of it or it's a failed prophecy.
No, it's the interpretation of the majority of experts.
all right. I'm going to go ahead and ask because this is the one thing that really gets me. Not now, don't tell it to me, but can you send me a source of where, God's people, he's referring to the Gentiles and the Ossians? Because I don't believe that.
Assyrians, you mean?
I don't believe he's calling them his people. I
Okay.
just don't. I
Well,
have commentary doctor after doctor to tell me that's not the case. But I'll hear you. I'll read it.
I have the New English Bible Oxford Study Edition that says it is the case. Anyway, okay, so here's the quote, chapter 52, verses 15. So shall he sprinkle many nations, kings shall shut their mouths because of him, for that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. So it's talking about kings. It's not saying my people will shut their mouths. It's saying kings will shut their mouths. And then in chapter 53 it says, who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? So it's expressing surprise. So it switches from talking about the kings, the Assyrian and Babylonian kings, to talking about in the voice of those kings. It's expressing surprise and shock.
Okay, what am I so talking about? I'm talking about Isaiah 53, 11.
Oh, 11. Okay.
It's talking about somebody bearing the iniquities for the transgressors. This
Yeah.
clearly.
No. It's this is actually a mistranslation. It's not for. It's because of. Let me find that. Here, I have a note on it. Hang on. Okay, for is a mistranslation. The Hebrew has the letter mem as a prefix for our transgressions and means from, not for. The Christian Standard Bible, Contemporary English Version, Holman Christian Standard Bible, Net Bible, and JPS Tanakh 1917 translate it correctly. It's because of, not for.
Okay, so he suffers because of the transgression.
Yeah, because of, meaning that the Babylonians, it's just a cause and effect thing. It's the Babylonians transgressed by afflicting the Israelites, or the righteous remnant, basically.
So if we accept your interpretation, it is a failed prophecy then.
Yes. Because, well, not because the Israelites didn't suffer, because they did suffer at the hands of the Babylonians, but the vindication part hasn't happened yet, because Israel hasn't been vindicated and the kings didn't shut their mouths and all that, So, yeah, it would be a failed prophecy for the collective interpretation. All right, anything else?
Yeah, I would like to make one more final point.
Okay.
It's Isaiah.
Wait, say that again?
Isaiah 53:9. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him.
Okay.
I want to clarify this. This again is still talking about righteous Israelites.
Okay. There was no deceit in his mouth. Look up Zephaniah 3:13. Hang on. Let me pull it up real quick. Zephaniah 3:13. Okay. Those who are left in Israel, they shall do no injustice and speak no lies, nor shall there be found in their mouth a deceitful tongue. So the righteous remnant has no deceit or violence. They will do no injustice. This is the righteous remnant, okay?
But as I said before, it's hard to hit a moving target. I feel like I have given many evidence that the earliest sources say it is messianic, and I understand what you're saying. I understand people change their mind, but as someone who fancies historical studies, I do believe the earliest source is the best. I would say if those Jews were wrong, you definitely have the advantage being able to claim whatever it is that you want is poetic here. And Israel means the nation here, and Israel means the righteous remnant here. That's all I have to say. The only point I will truly give to you here is the point where you say about Jesus' offspring. I'll look that up. But other than
Okay.
that, also
Well,
this guy,
I think that the earliest source is Isaiah himself, and he says specifically in Isaiah chapters 41 through 49 that the suffering servant is Israel. And what was your response to that again? To the 6 times that he calls the nation of Israel the servant?
he calls lots of people the servant. That doesn't mean they're the suffering servant.
Oh, so the suffering servant is different from the servant? But Isaiah 53 is the fourth of 4 servant songs. You're aware of that, right?
Yes, and he calls Isaiah the servant, and he differentiates between Jacob and Israel. He calls someone else the servant
Which
earlier.
which verse does he differentiate between Jacob and Israel again? Let me look that up real quick.
Isaiah 44:1.
44:1. Okay, let's see here. But now hear, O Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I have chosen. What? He just calls, he doesn't differentiate. They're the same. But hear now, O Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I have chosen.
What I'm reading says, "Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, comma, and Israel, comma, who I have chosen."
Okay, well, my version doesn't say and. Which version are you using?
King James.
King James? Come on, man. King James, really? The one that
Well,
was created 400 years ago? Come on.
isn't the earliest source the best?
You're not a King James onlyist, are you?
No, I'm a King James, the only copy I have is.
Get ESV. ESV is the best one, all right?
Yeah, why is it the best?
Because, well, actually, NRSV is the best version. That's the one endorsed by most scholars, and I can prove it to you later if you want me to prove that it's endorsed by scholars. And the ESV, the NRSV is related to the ESV. It's an updated version of the ESV, but it's a little bit less Christian friendly. The ESV is more Christian friendly, so that's the best one for you because you're a Christian. So you're gonna want the ESV. All right. It's the most accurate Christian-friendly version. All right. The RSV, for
Yes,
instance, in Isaiah, what was it? Isaiah 7:14, the virgin will conceive and all that. The NRSV version says a young woman will conceive because it translates Alma correctly. But of course, Christians don't like that, so the ESV version says virgin. The ESV version says virgin. A virgin will conceive because that's the Christian friendly version, you know. So you're gonna want the
all
ESV.
right. Yes, be Stephen. You know me. I just can't take having my beliefs challenged. I must get the SV one.
Yep.
Ultimately, this has been on my mind. This James Sonder guy has been commenting. Can he join?
Yeah, sure. But you'd have to leave. Is that okay with you?
I would have to leave.
Yeah, because
So
there can't be multiple. There can't be multiple people joining, unfortunately.
all right. So James, if you're still here, I'm gonna leave now, and whatever happens, happens. Good debate,
All right.
Stephen.
Yeah, good debate.
Thank
Get
you. Have
get
a
back
good
to you
day.
later.
Yeah.
All right.